laying properly, right? So you put your fingers in between, and you make it, you move them over so that you get it to lay, so that it's aligned. You see how there's no wrinkle now?
Right.
Okay. And then I try to get them as close as I can to on the edges, but that doesn't always work. And then you pinch them together, okay?
Yep.
And you put it down.
Right.
Now, because we're going to use the lines on the mat, I'm actually going to put a little crease in there, but you don't have to. But I like to, and I always have a hard time if there's a shadow, I like to line it up on the line if I'm going to actually use the lines of the mat. And then you need to, and you see how it's offset?
Yes.
Okay. So then you take the ruler, and depending on which ruler you have, and obviously this one is just barely long enough here, but you can use the little black dots in between here.
Right.
Okay. Those are all even, just like the line is even. And so you take the little black dot and you line up the edges.
The bottom edge.
Yes, exactly. Or, and see, you also have this little tiny line underneath of the numbers. You can line up, you can use that if the dots are too hard to figure it out, okay? And you get it as close to the edge as you can so you don't waste fabric. And at this point, now, when I cut, I always use a finger or two on the side. So I've got my pinky over there on the edge holding it. And you splay out your hand so that you have stability. Open your ruler or your rotary cutter. Push down, straight, not tilted and not tilted, but straight. Smooth motion. Now, if you were to extend out, if this were longer, you would then kind of walk your hand up and continue, okay? Make sure to close your rotary blade, and then you can do, before you move this, you want to pull this scrap away.
Right.
Okay? So that's your clean cut.
Okay.
Now, there's a couple of things. I tend to do this backwards because I, for some reason, like to cut towards myself, you know, the way you're not supposed to cut. But if you're over here on this side and you want a 2-inch layout.
Yes.
Okay, so you're right that if you pull it over here, you're like, how do I do that?
Yes.
So there's a couple of cheater ways that I do. And one of them involves another ruler. So I'll measure out I want this to be a 2-inch strip. Okay? So I'll hold that and I can butt this exactly where I want it to be. And I also make sure I'm lining up my lines just like I did before.
Right.
Now I can move this away.
Okay.
Now, yes, that's fussy. That's absolutely fussy.
But it's easier to cut.
But when you're cutting this way, your ruler is supported, the fabric, it's not tilting or anything, especially if you have multiple layers.
Right.
And then you can just sit here and go like this. Now, I know for a fact that there are people who don't use that other method. And what they'll do is they'll come over here and they'll measure it with the 2 inches. Now, this is where it comes back to, then it's off the fabric, so it's not fully supported, and you are cutting towards yourself and you're crossing.
Which I don't
That is
like.
not the safest way to do it,
Yeah.
and it's not very comfortable.
No.
So,
Because I will often not be up against the edge by the time I get back to my hand.
right. Now, so that's if you're cutting on this side. Here's the other thing. Let's go to the other side, okay? Because I think more people, more right-handed people, probably do this. All right, so I'm doing the same thing as far as squaring that up.
Right.
I could do that, or I could be smart about it and safe about it and just turn this. So once you've done this, a lot of people, they simply turn it, okay? However you do, however you like to do. And then what they'll do is, they don't have a bunch of junk on the one side. Okay. But they will then line up your lines at the edge like you are supposed to. You've got everything here. And now, because you've measured 2 inches here.
That's the step I was missing, flipping the cloth over.
Okay, now, here's another trick. You do not have to pick this up and move it and then realign.
Okay.
There are many people that literally simply, you've got 2 inches here, now we're going to go to 4, and they pick up their ruler without moving the fabric, and now they're going to put this on the 4-inch line.
Oh, how easy is that?
Okay. Okay. Now, that's the hard way, because I just remembered. See, I don't always do things the easy way. What a lot of people will do is they'll say, I have a 6-inch ruler and I want to cut 2-inch strips. So, they line this up like they did. Okay, there's 6 inches. We have 6 inches. And they cut 6 inches. Then they mark this over. They go over 2 inches. And make another cut. And then they pull it over another 2 inches to finish the last cut. And this involves the math, which is why I typically don't do this, because I'm terrible at subtraction. But there you go.
Well, that was very simple.
That's very simple. And that is really the way that people will say, well, how many are you going to do? Well, I never know how many I'm going to do. So, but literally, that is the easiest way to do that. If you know you're cutting 6-inch strips and you have 2-inch strips and you have a 6-inch ruler, you're golden. Now, you get to the very end like this, and I'm not quite 6 inches.
Right.
Who cares? I have a clean cut, and I can go over 2 inches and do 4.
Now, that's not going to be a clean cut because the edge is not clean. So how do you account for that?
Well, not this side, but
Right.
this side that I just finished
Yeah.
is, I even though when I move these, if I move the fabric, I line it up
Yeah.
with the grid,
Yeah.
so I know it's straight.
Okay.
And then I start out at 4 inches because I know that that fits.
Oh, so the end piece
Right,
is
so-
not even into consideration. It's 4 inches from the left side.
Yes, exactly, because see how this, if I go with 6 inches and I go to trim or cut, I get a wonky little piece and then it's not correct this way, so I'm not going to deal with that math.
Exactly.
What I'm going to do is start with the full amount of the 4 inches here. And this essentially is my clean cut.
Right.
Okay, and that'll go into my scrap bag for strips or strings.
Right.
And then I'll come over 2 inches and line that up. And
Sweet.
there you have it.
Okay.
That last method is the way to do it. But you have to know how many you're starting with, you have to know the size of your ruler and how you go. Obviously this is easy because this is 6 and we're dividing by 2-inch strips.
Right.
If you need 3.5, then you have to go out to 7 inches.
Okay. But if you're like me, you'd probably just do it the slower way.
Yes, and now, or you would have a larger ruler such as this
Yeah.
is a 15 or a 12.5. And then you would start with something larger where you have your 7.5-inch mark.
Right.
And you can just do that, and then you know ahead of time because you can take the stress away and just write it down on paper and say, this is what I need to do. And with your ruler, it's very nice that you can see where the 3.5 is.
Yeah.
If you were going to do 3.5, you would end up just doing 3.5 with this particular ruler, and just cutting 3.5 and then moving, cutting 3.5 and moving is what you do instead of saying, oh, I'm starting at 7 and 3.5. Because what I've found that I did was I would look at the wrong place on the ruler, and I would end up cutting a 3-inch strip instead of 3.5.
Right.
And
That's happened to
so-
me.
Right, and then I get frustrated, which is why I tend not to do this because I don't want to. I want to add instead of subtract. My brain works better with adding than subtracting. And so I do. Now, I know that I'm very careful and I do cut across myself. I don't show people that when I'm teaching. So
Well-
that's how you do it. You start with a big number and you subtract back. And the nice thing about doing that is that your fabric is supported as you start out and you move over
Right.
back.
And you're getting a more accurate cut.
Yes, and it's not bad. Now if you've had to fuss with getting everything straight on the side and then you turn it, that can be frustrating because then you're out of alignment again, and then so that's another issue. Depending on the size of your fabric, you can get cutting mats that are on the rotation, the Lazy Susan type cutting mats, and I have one of those. I can't remember. I'll find it. But literally, if it's small enough, You do your clean cut on the right, then you rotate the mat. You never have to touch the fabric, and then you start your cutting. But that's meaning you're going to work with smaller pieces. I typically don't always work with smaller pieces.
So if I'm working with pieces that, like these,
Yes,
that
the
are
jelly
already
rolls.
small,
Yes.
and I'm cutting 3.5 inches
Yes.
from each one,
Yes.
am I using the same way to do that?
Yes,
Okay.
you are. And in fact, what I would make sure to do is stack them. I would not probably do more than 4, depending on the size of your rotary cutter. And I think you have a 60.
I have 2. I have a small
Do you
and a
have
large.
Okay, if you have a 60 millimeter, which is the large one, versus the 45, you can do more layers this way with the 60 and not hurt your hand, and it has more pressure, and also put in a sharp blade.
I need one.
never, I don't change them frequently enough, but I can tell you it makes a huge difference, especially if you're starting a new project and it's been a little bit like you've been fighting with it before.
I was fighting with my big one, yeah.
So
That makes sense.
right now they've got a lot of sales. Use Joanne coupons. Michael's will take Joanne coupons, by the way.
Oh, good.
And a lot of times, I think Joanne's has stopped carrying the 5-packs, and Michael still has them.
Okay.
So, but what I would do is stack them up, and I would do it, and you can do it in a fold and do it from the end. Just
Okay.
know that your where it's folded, you're going to end up with an odd piece. If you're
So if
okay
it's
with
like,
that.
so if I have 2-inch strips like this one,
Yes, you could actually just say this came off of your jelly roll.
Yeah.
You can put this down, and
let's say I wanted 2 3.5
right,
inch.
and do your clear cut or do your clean cut this way.
Yeah.
However you want, and then just off you go, and you're going to end up. You can start from here. You might measure it first to figure out how many you're going to have, because if you do this, you'll end up with 2 odd sizes, which if you did it out fully straight, you'd have 1 extra piece. And that can be critical in a project. Depends on how closely they've calculated the yardage. But even if you don't do that, and say you have different colors
Right.
from your strips,
Yeah.
just open it out, put the next one down, and the other thing is if you get too many layers, then they shift,
Right.
and your cutting isn't as precise, which is going to lead to
So what's the
imprecise.
cap?
4 is good.
Okay.
Really, I think 4 is good. You could go up to 6, but I'd stay with 4, 3 or 4. And also the thing to keep in mind for a different project is if you have something that has an angle to it, like a chisel, if you're going to cut a 45 degree, if you have them folded and you do the 45 degree, you're going to get one left hand and one right hand side. So if it's important that everything always go the same direction,
Okay.
you want to open those out.
Right. And do them singly.
Yes. And, like if you're doing binding, you cut it at an angle and then you turn and you cut it at an angle and you've got everything going the same way. I've done it too many times to, that I've learned to do that. But even when I did my chisel die, when I folded them over to fit them on the die and everything, and I wasn't thinking about it, and you go back and forth, you fan fold them over, well, I got half going left and half going right. Well, I didn't keep doing that after a while. So, there's lots of different ways to do it. And
Well, I think that the critical thing was that you folded it and gave it a straight edge first. And then you
Okay.
started from the other side.
Yeah.
And that made more sense.
well, and the reason that you do that is because you don't have, even if you have a very long ruler, like this 24-inch. Okay, so you can have a very long ruler, but that's not 40 inches. If you take yardage off of a bolt, that's 40 to 42 inches. You got to fold it. And if you don't fold it correctly, what happens is that you get, instead of a piece when you open it out and it's straight, that's straight. What happens is if you don't do the fussing with it and make it straight on the grain, you get that little bent piece
Yeah.
where it has an elbow in there. And you can use those pieces if you're small enough here, and then you have to adjust, and that's fussy with it, but you end up with that little piece in the middle that you're not using.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Sweet.
Okay?
Okay. Thank you, Miss Connie.
You're welcome.